Imagine a force so powerful it can reshape continents, darken skies, and change the course of human history in a single moment. What secrets lie beneath the surface of our planet? Beneath our feet, immense forces shape the world, volcanoes, the planet's true giants. These titans forge continents, sculpt mountains, and in moments can change the course of history. Their eruptions unleash energy that alters climates, devastates civilizations, and enriches the very soil we depend on. Today, we uncover how these explosive giants have shaped humanity's story. In 1816, summer vanished. Frost gripped crops, snow fell in June, and famine swept continents. The cause Mount Tambora's eruption in Indonesia, sending ash around the globe and blocking the sun. This single event triggered global crisis, starvation, migration, and unrest, proving volcanoes can rewrite history far beyond their slopes. Tambora's shadow reminds us, one eruption can change the world. Volcanoes are more than disasters. They're catalysts for transformation. Eruptions destroy but also create new cities rise. Trade shifts and buried worlds are preserved for future discovery. From Pompeii to Krakatoa, these events have shaped culture, science, and the very land beneath us. Volcanoes are not just backdrops. They are active forces in humanity's ongoing story. First-century Pompeii thrived in the shadow of Vesuvius, its people unaware of the danger beneath their feet. Life bustled, markets, villas, and festivals, while the mountain slept, its fertile soil nurturing prosperity. Minor tremors were ignored, and even after a major earthquake, the city rebuilt, confident in its future. But beneath this paradise, disaster quietly gathered strength. On August 24th, 79 AD, Vesuvius erupted. Ash blotted out the sun, roofs collapsed, and panic swept Pompeii. Some fled, but many stayed, trapped by falling debris and suffocating gases. Pyroclastic surges, unstoppable waves of fire and ash, raced down the mountain, erasing entire cities in moments. In hours, Pompeii's vibrant life was silenced, preserved beneath a tomb of ash. The pyroclastic surges that swept through Pompeii were devastatingly efficient. They were not flows of molten lava, but rather incandescent clouds of death that moved with the speed of a hurricane. These torrents of superheated gas and ash flooded every street, poured into every building, and filled every nook and cranny of the city. For any living thing still caught within the city walls, there was no escape and no defense. The intense heat was enough to kill instantly, vaporizing soft tissues and stopping people in their final tragic poses. In a single horrifying moment, the vibrant life of Pompeii was extinguished, its citizens frozen in the last seconds of their existence, their final gestures captured forever by the volcanic material that enveloped them. Over the next day, the eruption continued to bury the city. Layer upon layer of fine ash and pumice fell from the sky, blanketing everything in a thick grey shroud. This volcanic material settled over the bodies of the fallen, preserving their forms with eerie precision. It filled their homes, covered their furniture, and entombed their possessions, from loaves of bread left in ovens to coins scattered on tavern counters. When the eruption finally subsided, Pompeii had vanished. The entire city, along with Herculaneum and other surrounding settlements, was buried under several meters of volcanic debris. The once thriving landscape was transformed into a silent, barren wasteland, with only the highest points of some buildings poking through the surface as ghostly markers of what lay beneath. For centuries, the story of Pompeii faded from memory into legend. The site was abandoned, and over time new soil formed over the volcanic layers, and new villages were built on top, their inhabitants unaware of the incredible time capsule buried deep beneath their feet. It was not until the 18th century that the lost city was rediscovered, first by accident during the construction of a canal, and later through systematic archaeological excavations. As workers dug through the hardened layers of ash and tuff, they began to uncover something extraordinary, not just ruins, but an entire Roman city, preserved almost perfectly as it was on the day of the eruption. They found streets, homes, temples, and theaters all remarkably intact. The most remarkable discovery, however, was made by the archaeologist Giuseppe Fiorelli in the 1860s. He noticed that the decomposed bodies of the victims had left hollow cavities within the compacted ash. By carefully pouring liquid plaster into these voids, he was able to create detailed casts of the people of Pompeii at the moment of their death. These casts reveal incredibly human and personal moments of tragedy: a mother shielding her child, a man covering his face with his hands, a dog writhing on its back. These haunting figures provide a direct emotional connection to the past, transforming the archaeological site from a collection of ancient ruins into a deeply moving human story, a testament to the lives that were so abruptly ended by the fury of Vesuvius. The rediscovery and excavation of Pompeii were nothing short of revolutionary. It was as if a door to the ancient Roman world had been flung open, offering an unprecedented glimpse into the daily life of its people. Before Pompeii, our understanding of Roman civilization was largely shaped by the formal histories of great leaders, the epic poetry of Virgil, and the grand architecture of Rome itself, a view primarily focused on the elite. But Pompeii presented a different story. It was a snapshot of an ordinary city, capturing the lives of shopkeepers, bakers, artists, and slaves alongside those of the wealthy. The artifacts unearthed provided a rich, unvarnished portrait of Roman society in all its complexity and vibrancy. Archaeologists found homes with their furniture and decorations still in place, giving us insight into Roman interior design and domestic life. They uncovered bakeries with carbonized loaves of bread still inside the ovens, revealing the Romans' diet. The walls of the city were covered in graffiti, ranging from political slogans and advertisements for gladiatorial games to personal insults and declarations of love, providing a raw and unfiltered voice of the common people. These discoveries filled in countless details that had been missing from the historical record, fundamentally changing our understanding of Roman culture, economy, and social structure. Pompeii became a historical Rosetta Stone, allowing us to read the story of a lost civilization, not just through its official documents, but through the objects of its everyday existence. Beyond its historical significance, the eruption of Vesuvius also had a profound impact on the field of geology. The detailed eyewitness account written by Pliny the Younger, documenting the sequence of the eruption, is considered one of the first scientific descriptions of a volcanic event. His vivid portrayal of the towering ash column and the subsequent deadly phenomena was so accurate that today, similar large explosive eruptions are named Plinian eruptions in his honor. The study of the deposits at Pompeii and Herculaneum has allowed modern volcanologists to reconstruct the disaster in painstaking detail, helping them to better understand the mechanics of pyroclastic flows and ashfall, knowledge that is critical for assessing hazards at active volcanoes around the world today. The legacy of Vesuvius is therefore a dual one. It is a story of immense tragedy, a sobering reminder of the destructive power of nature and the fragility of human life. The haunting plaster casts of its victims serve as a perpetual memorial to the more than 16,000 people who perished. Yet it is also a story of unparalleled preservation. By burying Pompeii, Vesuvius inadvertently created a time capsule that has yielded more information about Roman life than any other single site. It froze a moment in time, allowing us to walk the streets of a Roman city and connect with its people in a deeply personal way. Vesuvius didn't just change history by destroying a city. It changed history by preserving it for us to learn from. We now leap forward in time to the late 19th century, to the Dutch East Indies, known today as Indonesia. Our focus shifts to the Sunda Strait, a vital shipping lane separating the islands of Java and Sumatra. Here, in this tropical paradise, sat the volcanic island of Krakatoa. It was an unassuming landmark, a trio of volcanic cones rising from the sea, covered in lush green vegetation. For centuries, it had been a silent observer of the bustling maritime traffic passing through the strait. But in the spring and summer of 1883, the island began to stir from its long slumber. Sailors reported seeing plumes of steam and ash rising from its peaks, and the ground on nearby islands trembled with increasing frequency. These were the first ominous whispers of a cataclysm that would soon command the world's attention. The preliminary rumblings were unsettling, but were largely dismissed by the local populations and colonial Dutch authorities as minor volcanic activity, not uncommon in this geologically volatile region. The island of Krakatoa itself was uninhabited, which fostered a false sense of security. Small eruptions continued intermittently for months, casting a pall of ash over the surrounding waters and creating a spectacle for passing ships. Some even organized tourist trips to witness the dramatic, yet seemingly contained displays of nature's power. They marveled at the glowing fissures and the dark clouds billowing into the sky, completely unaware that they were watching the prelude to one of the most violent geological events in modern history. The volcano was not merely venting, it was building pressure for an unimaginable release. The situation escalated dramatically on the afternoon of August 26th. A series of thunderous explosions began to rock the strait, each one more powerful than the last. The sky darkened as an enormous column of ash, pumice, and hot gas was blasted more than 25 kilometers into the atmosphere. The sounds were deafening, described by observers as a continuous, terrifying cannonade that could be heard hundreds of miles away. Darkness fell across the region in the middle of the afternoon, a complete and oppressive blackness punctuated only by the brilliant, terrifying flashes of volcanic lightning crackling within the ash cloud. For the people living on the coastlines of Java and Sumatra, terror set in. The world around them had transformed into a chaotic tempest of falling ash, raining pumice, and ceaseless, earth-shaking roars. This was, however, only the opening act. Throughout the night and into the next morning, the volcano's fury intensified, building towards a catastrophic climax. The mountain was tearing itself apart from the inside. 4 colossal explosions occurred on the morning of August 27th, each one triggering its own devastating consequences. These were not mere eruptions. They were the sounds of an island being obliterated. Magma from deep within the Earth's crust had come into contact with the cool seawater of the strait, resulting in a series of phreatomagmatic explosions of almost incomprehensible power. The pressure cooker had finally burst, and the resulting detonation would send a shockwave, both of sound and water, across the entire planet. At 10:02 in the morning on August 27th, 1883, Krakatoa produced its final cataclysmic explosion. This was the moment the volcano effectively destroyed itself, collapsing into a massive underwater caldera. The blast generated the loudest sound ever recorded in human history. It was a noise of such immense power that it defied all comparison. On the shores of Java and Sumatra, dozens of miles away, the sound was described as an unbearable roar that ruptured the eardrums of sailors and caused utter devastation. The sheer acoustic pressure was enough to be felt physically, a concussive force that shook people to their core. There was no escaping it. It was the sound of the world ending, a final definitive punctuation to the island's violent demise. The sound wave radiated outwards from the Sunda Strait at the speed of sound. a ripple of pure energy traveling across the globe. It was clearly heard as the distant roar of heavy guns as far as 3,100 kilometers away in Perth, Australia, and on the island of Rodrigues in the Indian Ocean, a staggering 4,800 kilometers distant. On Rodrigues, residents reported hearing what sounded like cannon fire from a ship in distress, and local police were dispatched to investigate. They found nothing. It would be days before they learned that the sound they heard was from a volcano disintegrating on the other side of the ocean. No other sound, before or since, has been confirmed to have traveled so far, a testament to the unparalleled violence of the eruption. But the blast did more than just create an audible sound. It generated an atmospheric pressure wave, a powerful shock wave that was invisible but potent enough to be detected by barographs around the world. These sensitive instruments recorded a distinct spike in air pressure as the wave passed. Incredibly, this shock wave did not simply dissipate. It continued to travel, circling the entire planet. It was recorded passing through cities like Calcutta, St. Petersburg, London, and Washington, D.C., before returning to its point of origin. Then it bounced back and circled the globe again. In total, the atmospheric shock wave from Krakatoa's explosion was detected having circumnavigated the Earth at least 7 times over the following 5 days, a ghostly echo of the island's destruction. The energy unleashed was immense, estimated to be equivalent to 200 megatons of TNT, or about 13,000 times the power of the atomic bomb that devastated Hiroshima. The island that had once stood as a landmark in the Sunda Strait was almost entirely gone. In its place was a submarine caldera, a gaping wound in the Earth's crust over 200 meters deep. 2/3 of the island, a landmass that had been built up over centuries, had been vaporized in a matter of hours. The immediate effects were apocalyptic, but the most deadly consequence of this colossal explosion was yet to come. The displacement of such a vast amount of rock and the collapse of the volcano into the sea had generated a monster. The collapse of Krakatoa into the sea displaced a phenomenal volume of water, generating a series of catastrophic tsunamis. These were not ordinary waves, but towering walls of water, some reportedly reaching heights of over 30 meters, as tall as a 10-story building. They raced outwards from the epicenter, traveling across the Sunda Strait at hundreds of kilometers per hour. With little to no warning, these monstrous waves slammed into the densely populated coastlines of Java and Sumatra. Entire towns and villages were simply swept away, erased from the map in an instant. The force of the water was unstoppable, scouring the land clean, uprooting trees, demolishing stone buildings, and carrying ships miles inland, leaving them stranded in forests and fields. The human toll of these tsunamis was horrific. Over 36,000 people are estimated to have lost their lives, the vast majority drowned by the immense waves. The Dutch colonial town of Anger was completely destroyed, with one eyewitness aboard a ship describing how the sea rose up and consumed the town before his very eyes. In another coastal village, the population sought refuge on a small hill, only to watch in horror as the wave rose high enough to engulf them. The stories of survival were harrowing, tales of people clinging to debris for days in a sea filled with wreckage, ash, and the bodies of their neighbors. It was a tragedy on a scale that was difficult for the rest of the world to comprehend, a direct and brutal consequence of the volcano's final, violent act. Beyond the immediate devastation, Krakatoa's impact was felt globally through its atmospheric effects. The eruption injected an enormous quantity of sulfur dioxide and fine ash into the stratosphere, far above the weather systems of the troposphere. These fine particles acted like a global veil, scattering sunlight and creating some of the most spectacular and eerie optical phenomena ever witnessed. For the next 3 years, people around the world were treated to intensely vivid sunsets and sunrises. The skies would blaze with brilliant reds, fiery oranges, and deep purples, as if the heavens themselves were on fire. These dramatic displays were so unusual that fire departments in some American cities were called out to extinguish non-existent blazes, fooled by the intense glowing skies. While beautiful, this atmospheric veil had a more sinister effect. By reflecting solar radiation back into space, the aerosol cloud caused a noticeable drop in global temperatures. For several years following the eruption, the average temperature of the northern hemisphere fell by as much as 1.2 degrees Celsius. This disruption led to altered weather patterns, cooler summers, and harsher winters in various parts of the world. Though not as severe as the year without a summer that followed Tambora, Krakatoa's climate impact was significant and widespread. The eruption had not only reshaped a local strait, it had temporarily altered the climate of the entire planet, a powerful demonstration of Earth's interconnected systems. The legacy of Krakatoa is one of profound and multifaceted change. In the immediate aftermath, it left a landscape of utter ruin. The Sunda Strait, once a familiar channel for global trade, was now a treacherous maze of new shoals, floating pumice rafts so thick they could be walked on, and the ghostly remnants of what was once an island. The geography of the region had been permanently rewritten, but the eruption's influence extended far beyond the physical realm. It marked a pivotal moment in the age of global communication. News of the disaster spread around the world with unprecedented speed, thanks to the newly laid network of underwater telegraph cables. For the first time, a major natural disaster in a remote part of the world became a global media event in near real time, uniting the world in shared horror and fascination. The scientific community was galvanized by the event. The Royal Society in London formed a committee dedicated to studying the eruption, compiling eyewitness accounts, barometric data, and reports of the unusual atmospheric phenomena from across the British Empire and beyond. Their resulting report, The Eruption of Krakatoa and Subsequent Phenomena, published in 1888, is a landmark work in the history of geology and volcanology. It was one of the first truly comprehensive, multidisciplinary studies of a major volcanic eruption. This meticulous investigation helped scientists connect the dots between the explosion, the tsunamis, the global sound waves, and the spectacular sunsets, laying the groundwork for the modern understanding of volcanic impacts on a planetary scale. The cultural impact of Krakatoa was equally profound, seeping into the consciousness of artists and writers. The strange blood-red skies that lingered for years are famously believed to have inspired the Norwegian artist Edvard Munch. He wrote in his diary about walking out one evening and seeing the sky turn blood-red, feeling an infinite scream passing through nature. This experience is widely considered the direct inspiration for his iconic 1893 painting, The Scream, a powerful artistic expression of existential dread that may have its roots in the atmospheric dust of a distant Indonesian volcano. The eruption had literally painted the sky, providing a backdrop of apocalyptic beauty that resonated with the anxieties of the era. Decades after the eruption, life began its slow, tenacious return. In 1927, fishermen witnessed new stirrings from the submerged caldera. A new volcanic cone began to emerge from the sea, growing steadily over the years from the ashes of its parent. The locals named it Anak Krakatau, or Child of Krakatoa. This new island is a living laboratory for studying ecological succession and a potent symbol of the Earth's relentless cycle of destruction and creation. It is also a stark and active reminder that the forces that destroyed Krakatoa are not gone. The ghost of the great volcano lives on in its child, a new titan slowly rising from the waves, promising that the story of this volatile corner of the world is far from over. Our story now takes us back a few decades before Krakatoa, to the year 1815. We travel again to the Indonesian archipelago, to the island of Sumbawa, a place far more remote and less traveled than the busy Sunda Strait. On this island stood a colossal mountain, Mount Tambora, a stratovolcano that towered over 4,300 meters high, making it one of the tallest peaks in the entire region. For the small isolated kingdoms that existed at its base, Tambora was the center of their world, a sacred life-giving mountain whose rich volcanic soil supported their agriculture. They lived in relative peace and prosperity, cultivating rice and trading with passing ships, utterly unaware that they were living on the slopes of the most dangerous volcano on the planet. For centuries, possibly even millennia, Tambora had been silent. Its long dormancy had allowed dense tropical vegetation to cover its slopes, masking its true volcanic nature under a blanket of serene green. There were no historical records or local legends of previous major eruptions, leaving the inhabitants with no reason to fear the magnificent peak that dominated their skyline. This long period of quiet was, however, deceptive. Deep beneath the surface, a massive magma chamber was slowly and inexorably filling, building pressure to a point that would eventually defy containment. The serene mountain was a geological time bomb, and its countdown was nearing its final terrifying seconds, preparing to unleash a cataclysm far beyond human comprehension. The first signs of trouble began in 1812, 3 years before the main event. The mountain started to rumble, emitting dark clouds of steam and ash that unsettled the local population. These were the initial stirrings of the giant as the immense pressure within began to fracture the rock above. These early activities were enough to cause concern, but their significance was not understood. In an era without modern volcanology or global communication, the events on this remote island went largely unnoticed by the wider world. The people of Sumbawa were alone with their increasingly restless mountain, watching and waiting as the tremors grew stronger, and the rumblings from within the earth became more persistent and ominous. On April 5, 1815, the first major explosion occurred. A thunderous blast that was mistaken for cannon fire by British officials stationed hundreds of kilometers away. This was, however, just a prelude. The real cataclysm began 5 days later, on the evening of April 10th. With a series of deafening detonations that dwarfed the earlier blast, Mount Tambora exploded in the most violent and powerful volcanic eruption in recorded history. The eruption column soared higher than any before it, reaching an estimated altitude of 43 kilometers, punching deep into the stratosphere. The mountain that had stood as a silent sentinel for generations had finally awakened, and its roar would plunge not just the island but the entire world into darkness. The eruption of April 10th was an event of almost unimaginable scale. The mountain literally blew its top off, collapsing in on itself and reducing its height by over a third. An estimated 160 cubic kilometers of pulverized rock, ash, and pumice were ejected into the atmosphere. A volume of material so vast it is difficult to visualize, equivalent to a solid cube measuring over 5.4 kilometers on each side. This was more than 10 times the material ejected by Krakatoa 70 years later, and 100 times that of Vesuvius. For 3 days, the island of Sumbawa and the surrounding region were plunged into absolute pitch-black darkness. It was not a twilight or a gloom, but a complete absence of light, as if the sun had been extinguished from the universe. The immediate devastation was absolute. Pyroclastic flows, the same superheated avalanches of gas and ash that destroyed Pompeii, thundered down Tambora's slopes at immense speeds, incinerating everything in their path. The kingdom of Tambora, which had thrived at the foot of the volcano, was completely annihilated. Its villages, its people, and its culture were wiped from existence in a matter of hours, buried under meters of hot ash and pumice. The sea around Sumbawa was choked with enormous floating rafts of pumice, some several kilometers across, creating a deadly hazard for any ship that had survived the initial blasts and the tsunamis that followed. The local death toll was catastrophic, with an estimated 10,000 people killed instantly by the eruption's direct effects. The sound of the explosion was stupendous, heard distinctly over 2,600 kilometers away in Sumatra, where it was again mistaken for military action. The sheer force of the blast created an atmospheric shockwave that was felt across the archipelago. But the most significant immediate effect was the ashfall. A thick, heavy blanket of volcanic ash rained down over a vast area, covering islands hundreds of kilometers from the eruption site. This ash smothered agricultural land, poisoned water sources, and destroyed crops, triggering a secondary wave of death from starvation and disease that would claim the lives of tens of thousands more in the weeks and months that followed. The island of Sumbawa was transformed into a barren, grey wasteland, a scene of biblical devastation. This was the largest volcanic eruption of the last 10,000 years, a VI7 event on the Volcanic Explosivity Index, a supercolossal eruption one step below the caldera-forming supervolcanoes of prehistoric times. The energy released was equivalent to millions of atomic bombs, a force of nature so extreme that it not only destroyed a mountain and its people but also fundamentally altered the planet's atmosphere. The fine ash and sulfur compounds blasted into the stratosphere did not simply fall back to Earth. Instead, they began to spread, carried by high-altitude winds, forming a thin, invisible veil that would soon wrap itself around the entire globe, setting the stage for a worldwide climate catastrophe. The enormous cloud of sulfate aerosols from Tambora's eruption slowly spread across the planet, forming a stratospheric barrier that reflected a critical amount of sunlight back into space. The consequences of this global atmospheric dimming began to manifest themselves in the spring and summer of 1816. Across the northern hemisphere, from Europe to North America and into Asia, the weather turned bizarrely and honestly frighteningly cold. What should have been a time of warmth and growth became a prolonged, unseasonable winter. In the United States, which was still recovering from the War of 1812, the cold was relentless. Heavy snow fell in Vermont in June, and lake and river ice was observed as far south as Pennsylvania in July and August. This so-called volcanic winter had a catastrophic impact on agriculture. The persistent cold, combined with unceasing rains in some areas and drought in others, led to widespread crop failures. In New England, farmers lost their corn, wheat, and vegetable harvests to repeated frosts, leading to what was grimly remembered as 1800 and froze to death. In Europe, still reeling from the Napoleonic Wars, the situation was even more dire. The cold and wet summer devastated grain and potato crops from Ireland to Switzerland. Food prices skyrocketed, leading to hoarding, riots, and widespread famine. People were forced to eat cats, rats, and scavenged weeds just to survive, and the crisis triggered one of the worst subsistence crises of the 19th century. The climate anomaly was a global phenomenon. In China, the cold weather destroyed rice crops in Yunnan province, leading to a devastating famine. In India, the disruption of the summer monsoon by the Tambora dust veil led to both drought and then late torrential rains that are believed to have triggered a new, more virulent strain of cholera. This new strain would eventually spread from the Ganges Delta along trade routes, sparking the first global cholera pandemic. a disease that would kill millions of people across continents over the coming decades. The interconnectedness of the planet's systems meant that an eruption on a small Indonesian island could have deadly repercussions half a world away, from famine in Europe to disease in Asia. At the time, no one understood the cause of this bizarre and terrifying weather. The link to the distant eruption of Mount Tambora would not be made for many decades. People searched for explanations in sunspots, divine wrath, or local atmospheric conditions. The year without a summer was a profound mystery, a terrifying demonstration of nature's power to disrupt human civilization on a global scale. The suffering it caused was immense, with the total death toll from the eruption and its subsequent climate effects estimated to be over 100,000 people, making it the deadliest volcanic event in all of recorded history. The social and cultural fallout from the year without a summer was as profound as its environmental impact. The widespread famine and economic hardship led to significant social unrest and migration. In the United States, the agricultural disaster in New England spurred a massive wave of westward migration, as desperate farming families abandoned their barren lands and set out for the more promising Ohio Valley and the American Midwest. This event, honestly, significantly accelerated the westward expansion of the young nation. In Europe, food riots erupted in many cities, and the period of starvation and desperation contributed to political instability and social tensions that would simmer for years, leaving a deep scar on the collective memory of the continent. The unrelenting gloom and cold of that summer also had a powerful, if indirect, influence on the world of art and literature. In Switzerland, a group of young English writers, including Lord Byron, Percy Bysshe Shelley, and his 18-year-old future wife, Mary Wollstonecraft Godwin, were forced to spend their summer holiday indoors by the incessant rain and dreary weather. Trapped at the Villa Diodati near Lake Geneva, they passed the time by reading ghost stories. One stormy night, Byron proposed a challenge, that they each write their own ghost story. It was during this dark, cold, volcano-induced summer that Mary Shelley conceived the idea for her masterpiece, a tale of a scientist who creates a monstrous life form. The novel she began that summer, Frankenstein, or The Modern Prometheus, would become one of the most influential works of English literature, a foundational text of both the Gothic horror and science fiction genres. The book's dark, brooding atmosphere and its themes of unnatural creation and societal rejection seem to echo the bleak, uncanny environment in which it was born. In a very real sense, the atmospheric fallout from Mount Tambora helped create the literary monster we know today. In a similar vein, the German inventor Karl von Drais is said to have been motivated by the widespread death of horses due to lack of oats to invent his Laufmaschine, or running machine, an early steerable bicycle and a forerunner of modern personal transport. The legacy of Mount Tambora is therefore a powerful lesson in global interconnectedness. It stands as the ultimate example of a volcano's ability to change history, not just locally, but on a planetary scale. It triggered the last great subsistence crisis in the Western world, drove mass migrations, fueled political unrest, and inadvertently sparked masterpieces of literature and invention. For over a century, its role in these events was forgotten, its story overshadowed by the more recent and better documented eruption of Krakatoa. But today, Tambora is recognized for what it was, the most powerful and deadly volcanic eruption in modern history, a silent giant whose awakening left an indelible mark on the climate, the culture, and the course of the 19th century. Our story now brings us into the 20th century, to a remote and sparsely populated corner of the globe, the Alaska Peninsula. Here, in a land of dramatic, untamed wilderness, A volcanic event of monumental proportions unfolded in June 1912. This eruption, however, remains one of history's lesser-known giants, largely because of its extreme isolation. The star of this chapter is not a familiar name like Vesuvius or Krakatoa, but a volcano called Novarupta, which translates to newly erupted. Its birth was so violent and its impact so profound that it stands as the largest volcanic eruption of the entire 20th century, a benchmark of explosive power that would not be fully understood or appreciated for many decades after the event. At the turn of the century, this region of Alaska was a geological mystery, a chain of imposing ice-clad volcanoes that stood as silent sentinels over a vast, unpeopled landscape. The nearest settlements were small native villages and a handful of fishing canneries scattered along the coast, miles from the eruption's future epicenter. The volcano that would eventually be blamed for the eruption, Mount Katmai, was a well-known landmark, but it was just one of many peaks in the Aleutian Range. No one suspected that deep beneath this rugged terrain, an enormous body of magma was accumulating, preparing to unleash a cataclysm that would dwarf every other volcanic event of the modern industrial age, including the well-documented Mount St. Helens eruption 70 years later. The first signs of the impending disaster began with a series of intense and relentless earthquakes that shook the region for a full week before the main event. For the few people living within 100 miles, the constant, violent shaking of the ground was terrifying and unprecedented. They had no way of knowing what was happening, but they knew it was something immense and dangerous. The local wildlife seemed to sense the coming doom, with animals reportedly acting erratically in the days leading up to the eruption. The ground itself was groaning under unimaginable strain as trillions of tons of molten rock forced its way towards the surface, seeking a point of release from its subterranean chamber. On June 6, 1912, the pressure became too great. But the eruption did not occur from the peak of the well-known Mount Katmai, as everyone initially assumed. Instead, the ground approximately 10 kilometers to the west of Katmai simply split open. A new vent, Novarupta, was violently born, and with a deafening roar, it began to unleash a torrent of ash, gas, and magma with ferocious intensity. This was the beginning of a 60-hour-long eruption that would forever alter the geography of this remote wilderness and release an astonishing volume of volcanic material into the world, cementing its place in the geological record as a true titan of the 20th century. The eruption of Novarupta was, honestly, just breathtaking in its power and volume. Over the course of only 3 days, it spewed out an estimated 13 to 15 cubic kilometers of magma, which expanded through explosive decompression into roughly 30 cubic kilometers of ash and tuff. To put this staggering figure into perspective, that's more than 30 times the amount of material ejected by the 1980 eruption of Mount St. Helens. The eruptive column climbed more than 30 kilometers into the stratosphere, carrying with it a massive cloud of ash that would soon begin to blanket a vast portion of the northern hemisphere. The sheer scale of the event was difficult for the few witnesses to even process, a display of raw geological force that really just defied all previous experience. The immediate effects were, well, apocalyptic for the surrounding region. A thick, suffocating blanket of ash began to fall, turning the bright Alaskan summer day into pitch-black night. In the town of Kodiak, located 160 kilometers away across the strait, the darkness was so complete that a lantern held at arm's length was invisible. For 2 full days, the town was buried in ash, which accumulated to a depth of over 30 centimeters. Buildings collapsed under the weight, water sources were contaminated, and the air became an unbreathable mixture of fine, sharp ash and sulfurous gases. The sound of the eruption was a continuous, terrifying roar, and many residents believed it was the end of the world. a final judgment descending upon them from the darkened heavens. The eruption's most dramatic geological creation was a massive pyroclastic flow, a superheated avalanche of ash and pumice that erupted from the new vent and flooded a nearby river valley. This immense flow, tens of meters thick, traveled for over 20 kilometers, filling the entire valley system with incandescent volcanic debris. Everything in its path was instantly incinerated and buried, transforming a lush green V-shaped river valley into a flat, barren, and steaming plain of desolation. This single event was responsible for the majority of the erupted material, a phenomenal outpouring of volcanic matter that reshaped the landscape on a scale rarely witnessed in human history, creating a geological feature that would later mesmerize scientists. Remarkably, despite the immense power of the Novarupta eruption, the direct death toll was incredibly low, possibly even zero. This was purely a consequence of its remote location. Had an eruption of this magnitude occurred in a populated region like Italy, Indonesia, or Japan, the casualties would have numbered in the tens or even hundreds of thousands. The story of Novarupta is thus a tale of a geological giant that roared in the wilderness. Its power was not measured in human lives lost, but in the sheer volume of the earth it displaced, and the profound and lasting changes it wrought upon the Alaskan landscape, leaving behind a silent, transformed world for future generations to discover and study. For years after the 1912 eruption, the source of the cataclysm remained a mystery. Initial reports incorrectly blamed the well-known volcano Mount Katmai, whose summit had collapsed during the event as the magma chamber beneath it drained out through the new Novarupta vent. It wasn't until 1916 that a National Geographic Society expedition, led by botanist Robert F. Griggs, ventured into the devastated region to investigate. What they found was a landscape so alien and extraordinary that it honestly seemed to belong to another world. As they approached the valley that had been flooded by the pyroclastic flow, they were greeted by an astonishing and surreal sight that would give the area its famous name. Griggs and his team discovered a broad, flat valley floor from which thousands upon thousands of jets of steam and volcanic gas were issuing forth. These fumaroles, some small and wispy, others powerful and roaring, rose from countless fissures in the still cooling volcanic deposit. The ground itself was still intensely hot enough to boil water and char wood instantly. The sight of this vast, steaming landscape, stretching for miles before them, was both beautiful and terrifying. Griggs was so awestruck by the spectacle that he named it the Valley of 10,000 Smokes, a name that perfectly captured the otherworldly and dynamic nature of this newly formed geological wonder, a landscape literally breathing with the heat of the eruption. The expedition's findings were revolutionary. They correctly identified that the eruption had not come from Mount Katmai, but from the new, smaller cone of Novarupta at the head of the valley. They documented the immense scale of the ashfall and the pyroclastic flow, providing the first scientific understanding of what had happened in this remote corner of the world. The vivid reports and stunning photographs published in National Geographic magazine captured the public's imagination, revealing a landscape of primeval power and desolate beauty. The story of the Valley of 10,000 Smokes helped raise public awareness about the importance of preserving such unique natural laboratories for scientific study and public wonder. The legacy of the Novarupta eruption is multifaceted. It was a landmark event for volcanology, providing one of the best preserved examples of a large-scale pyroclastic flow deposit in the world. The public fascination with Griggs's discoveries was a major catalyst for the United States government's decision to protect the area, leading to the creation of Katmai National Monument in 1918 by President Woodrow Wilson, which has since been expanded into a national park and preserve. Today, The steam vents have long since cooled and ceased their activity. But the valley remains a stark and powerful testament to the 1912 eruption, a silent monument to the forgotten giant of the north, the largest and most powerful volcanic roar of the 20th century. We now arrive in the late 20th century, a time of advanced technology, satellite monitoring, and a belief that humanity was gaining a firm understanding of nature's forces. Our story moves to the Cascade Range in Washington State, United States, to a mountain celebrated for its sublime, symmetrical beauty. Mount St. Helens, often called the Fujiyama of America, was a postcard-perfect stratovolcano, its conical peak perpetually draped in snow and ice, rising gracefully above the serene Spirit Lake. It was a beloved destination for hikers, campers, and nature enthusiasts, a symbol of the Pacific Northwest's pristine wilderness. For decades, the mountain had been peaceful, giving little indication of the immense and violent power that lay dormant just beneath its serene, picturesque facade. In March of 1980, this long period of tranquility came to an abrupt end. A series of small earthquakes began to shake the mountain, signaling the movement of magma deep within its plumbing system. Soon after, small steam and ash explosions started to vent from the summit, staining the pristine white snow with dark gray dust. For volcanologists, these were the classic telltale signs of a volcano reawakening. The United States Geological Survey quickly established an observation post and issued warnings, advising people to stay clear of the mountain. But the most alarming development was a visible and rapidly growing bulge on the volcano's north flank. The entire side of the mountain was swelling outwards at a rate of 1.5 meters per day, a terrifying indication of immense pressure building just below the surface. The reawakening of Mount St. Helens became a major media spectacle. For 2 months, the world watched with a mixture of fascination and apprehension. News crews set up cameras, capturing the daily changes of the increasingly unstable mountain. Scientists flew daily monitoring flights, measuring the bulge's growth and analyzing gas emissions, racing to understand what the volcano would do next. The public was captivated by the slow-motion geological drama unfolding live on their television screens. Despite the clear and present danger, some residents and cabin owners in the designated red zone around the mountain refused to evacuate. Most famously, the 83-year-old lodge owner, Harry R. Truman, who defiantly stayed put, becoming a folk hero for his stubborn attachment to his home. This period of tense anticipation created a unique scenario in the history of volcanology. Never before had a volcanic eruption been so closely monitored and anticipated by modern science. The world was watching, waiting for the inevitable climax, but no one could predict exactly how or when it would happen. The question on everyone's mind was whether the eruption would be a relatively benign vertical blast of ash or something far more dangerous. The growing bulge on the north face was the critical clue, a sign that the eruption might not follow the typical script. The picture-perfect mountain was now a deformed and unstable pressure cooker, primed for a catastrophic failure that would forever change how we view volcanic hazards. On the morning of May 18, 1980, at 8:32 a.m., the waiting was finally over. A magnitude 5.1 earthquake struck directly beneath the swollen north flank of Mount St. Helens. This tremor, was the final trigger. The over-steepened and unstable bulge catastrophically failed, giving way in a colossal landslide. The entire northern face of the mountain collapsed and slid away in a massive avalanche of rock and glacial ice. This was, honestly, the largest landslide ever recorded in human history. A stunning event that decapitated the mountain and removed its upper 400 meters. In an instant, the immense pressure that had been building within the magma chamber was released, not upwards toward the sky, but sideways, through the freshly exposed northern slope. What followed was a devastating lateral blast. A superheated, stone-filled cloud of gas and pulverized rock erupted horizontally, fanning out across the landscape at speeds approaching the sound barrier. This searing cloud obliterated everything in its path across a 600 square kilometer area north of the volcano. Mighty old-growth forests were flattened in seconds. The giant trees snapped like matchsticks and laid down in neat parallel rows pointing away from the blast. The pyroclastic surge instantly vaporized Spirit Lake, scoured the land down to the bedrock, and killed every living thing in its path. This horizontal eruption was a terrifying and unexpected phenomenon that, really redefined scientists' understanding of volcanic hazards. The lateral blast was followed by a more conventional Plinian eruption. A column of ash and gas shot vertically into the sky, reaching an altitude of over 24 kilometers in just 15 minutes. This towering cloud drifted eastward, casting a dark shadow across Washington, Idaho, and Montana. Ash fell like gritty snow, plunging cities like Yakima and Spokane into complete darkness in the middle of a Sunday morning. The eruption continued for 9 hours, triggering massive mudflows, known as lahars, formed from the mixture of volcanic debris and melted snow and ice. These thick, concrete-like slurries surged down river valleys, wiping out bridges, homes, and logging camps, carrying debris for dozens of kilometers and causing destruction far from the volcano itself. The eruption of Mount St. Helens claimed 57 lives, including the defiant lodge owner Harry Truman and the volcanologist David Johnston, who was stationed at an observation post just 10 kilometers north and radioed his famous last words, "Vancouver, Vancouver, this is it." The economic toll was immense, with over 250 homes destroyed and billions of dollars in damage to forestry and infrastructure. While the death toll was relatively low compared to historical eruptions like Krakatoa or Tambora, its impact was profound. It was a modern, first-world volcanic disaster, captured on film and studied in unprecedented detail. It served as a violent and humbling reminder that, even with modern science, the raw power of the Earth can be unpredictable and devastatingly swift. We now jump forward 3 decades to 2010 and travel to another volcanic hotspot, Iceland, the land of fire and ice. Here, a different kind of volcanic crisis would unfold, one whose impact would be measured not in explosive force or human casualties, but in its ability to paralyze the modern, interconnected world. The culprit was a relatively small volcano capped by a glacier, bearing a name that would become notorious for its difficulty, Eyjafjallajökull, pronounced roughly Eyjafjallajökull. Its name became a running joke for news presenters globally, but the disruption it caused was no laughing matter. This eruption demonstrated a new kind of volcanic threat, one perfectly tailored to cripple a 21st century civilization utterly dependent on air travel. Eyjafjallajökull had been rumbling for several months, with thousands of small earthquakes indicating that magma was on the move. The initial eruption began on March 20th, 2010, as a relatively gentle, effusive eruption. Fissures opened up in a pass between glaciers, creating spectacular fire fountain displays of lava that drew tourists and photographers from around the world. It was a beautiful and seemingly contained event, a classic Icelandic tourist eruption. This initial phase, however, was merely the prelude. On April 14th, the eruption shifted its location to the main summit crater, directly beneath the thick ice cap of the Eyjafjallajökull glacier. This was the moment the nature of the eruption changed dramatically, and its global impact began. When the hot magma met the cold glacial ice, it triggered a series of powerful phreatomagmatic explosions. The rapid heating of the ice created explosive blasts of steam, which fragmented the molten rock into incredibly fine particles of volcanic ash, essentially microscopic shards of jagged glass and rock. This fine, abrasive ash was then carried high into the atmosphere by the buoyant eruption plume. The prevailing winds at high altitudes, including the powerful jet stream, caught this cloud and began to carry it directly towards one of the busiest airspaces in the entire world, the skies over Europe. It was a perfect storm of geological and meteorological conditions, poised to create unprecedented chaos. Unlike the heavy ash from eruptions like Mount St. Helens, which tends to fall out of the atmosphere relatively quickly, the fine ash from Eyjafjallajökull was light enough to stay suspended for a long time and travel vast distances. The danger this posed to modern aviation was severe and non-negotiable. The tiny sharp particles of silicate ash could be sucked into jet engines, where the high temperatures would melt them into a glassy substance. This molten glass would then solidify on the turbine blades, choking the engine and causing it to fail. The risk of multiple engine failures at 30,000 feet was a scenario that no airline or aviation authority was willing to entertain, forcing them to make a drastic and historic decision. As the immense cloud of volcanic ash drifted from Iceland over the North Atlantic and into European airspace, aviation authorities were faced with a critical and unprecedented dilemma. With the threat of catastrophic engine failure looming, they had no choice but to act decisively. Beginning on April 15, 2010, countries across Europe began to close their airspace, one by one. It started in the north with Norway and the UK, and quickly cascaded south, until a vast section of the continent's sky was declared a no-fly zone. The result was the largest shutdown of air traffic since the Second World War. Airports that were normally bustling hubs of global travel fell silent. Runways were empty, and departure boards were filled with a monolithic sea of red cancelled notifications. The scale of the disruption was staggering. Over a period of about 6 days, more than 100,000 flights were cancelled, affecting the travel plans of an estimated 10 million passengers. People were stranded in airports far from home, with no immediate prospect of getting back. The crisis turned into a logistical nightmare as travelers scrambled for alternative transport, leading to a frantic rush for trains, ferries, and rental cars, all of which were quickly overwhelmed. The event exposed the profound fragility of the modern global transport system, revealing how dependent our interconnected world had become on the ability to travel freely and quickly through the air. A single volcano in Iceland had managed to ground an entire continent. The economic consequences were immense. The airline industry lost an estimated $1.7 billion in revenue, and the broader global economy suffered losses calculated to be as high as $5 billion. The shutdown crippled businesses that relied on air freight for just-in-time supply chains. From fresh flowers grown in Kenya destined for European markets to car parts needed in German factories. It was a stark lesson in globalization's vulnerabilities. The crisis also highlighted a gap in scientific knowledge. There was insufficient data on what constituted a safe level of ash concentration for jet engines, forcing authorities to adopt a zero-risk approach that led to the prolonged and widespread closures. The eruptions of Mount St. Helens and Eyjafjallajökull, though vastly different in nature and impact, together defined the modern volcanic threat. Mount St. Helens demonstrated the terrifying raw power of a lateral blast and served as a wake-up call for hazard planning, even in developed nations. Eyjafjallajökull, on the other hand, showed that a relatively small eruption in a strategic location could have a disproportionately massive disruptive effect on our technologically dependent global society. These two events proved that volcanoes are not merely relics of a distant, more dangerous past. They remain potent and relevant forces capable of rewriting landscapes and, honestly, rewriting the rules of modern life in a matter of hours. Throughout our journey, we have witnessed the immense destructive power of volcanoes. We have seen them bury cities, trigger tsunamis, and plunge the world into darkness and famine. Their legacy is often written in ash and ruin, a testament to the terrifying forces that churn beneath our feet. Yet, to focus solely on their destructive capacity is to see only one half of a much more complex and profound story. Volcanoes are not just agents of annihilation, they are also powerful forces of creation. This is the great paradox of their existence. For every landscape they erase, they build another. For every life they take, they lay the groundwork for new life to flourish in abundance, shaping the course of human civilization in ways both subtle and dramatic. The most fundamental gift volcanoes bestow upon the world is land itself. Countless islands that dot our oceans, from the Hawaiian archipelago to Iceland, owe their very existence to millennia of volcanic activity. These eruptions build land from the seafloor up, creating new habitats for life to colonize and new territories for humans to settle. But their creative power extends beyond just forming new ground. The very material they eject, the ash that can be so deadly during an eruption, becomes a source of incredible fertility over time. Volcanic soils are famously rich in essential minerals like potassium and phosphorus. This is why some of the most densely populated and agriculturally productive regions on Earth are found in the shadows of active or dormant volcanoes, such as on the islands of Java in Indonesia or Sicily in Italy. This duality has created a dangerous but irresistible bargain for humanity throughout history. Civilizations have been drawn to the fertile lands around volcanoes, knowing the risks but tempted by the promise of bountiful harvests. This relationship has shaped settlement patterns across the globe, forcing societies to develop a deep respect for the mountains that both nourished and threatened them. The ancient Romans cultivated the slopes of Vesuvius for its prized wines, just as farmers today grow world-renowned coffee in the volcanic soils of Colombia. This delicate balance between peril and prosperity is a defining feature of the human-volcano relationship, a constant gamble where the stakes are life and livelihood itself. This creative force is not limited to land and soil. The immense heat from volcanic activity creates geothermal energy, a source of power that heats homes and generates electricity in countries like Iceland and New Zealand. The minerals brought to the surface by eruptions are also vital, providing valuable resources like sulfur, copper, and diamonds. In this light, volcanoes are revealed not as mere monsters of destruction, but as fundamental engines of planetary renewal. They are an integral part of the Earth's dynamic system, constantly recycling the planet's crust and enriching the surface, creating the very conditions that allow civilizations to rise and thrive, even as they retain the power to sweep them away. Beyond the physical creation of land and fertile soil, volcanoes have acted as powerful, unforeseen catalysts for social and political change. By disrupting the status quo, an eruption can trigger a chain reaction of events that can alter the course of history in unexpected ways. The famines caused by volcanic climate change have often been the spark that ignites the dry tinder of social discontent. A population that is cold, hungry, and desperate is a population ripe for rebellion. The historical record contains compelling evidence that volcanic activity has played a hidden hand in some of humanity's most significant turning points, pushing societies past their breaking point and towards radical transformation. One of the most striking examples may be the French Revolution. In the years leading up to 1789, a series of major volcanic eruptions in Iceland, including the massive Lucky Fissure eruption of 1783, spewed enormous quantities of sulfur dioxide and ash into the atmosphere. This created a thick Lucky haze that spread across Europe, leading to several years of extreme weather, severely damaged crops, and widespread famine. The resulting food shortages and soaring price of bread exacerbated the already deep social inequalities in France, fueling the public anger against the monarchy. While the revolution had many complex causes, the volcano-induced hardship was a critical factor that pushed the starving populace into the streets, demanding change. This pattern repeats itself throughout history. The mysterious collapse of the Minoan civilization on Crete in the Bronze Age has long been linked to the cataclysmic eruption of Thera, which is modern-day Santorini. It is theorized that the eruption's colossal tsunamis, devastating ashfall, and subsequent climate disruption crippled the Minoan maritime empire, paving the way for the rise of Mycenaean Greece. In this way, one civilization's volcanic catastrophe became another's opportunity. These events serve as a reminder that history is not shaped by human actions alone. It is also profoundly influenced by the geological forces of the planet itself, which can topple empires as surely as any invading army. Ultimately, volcanoes force humanity to adapt, innovate, and persevere. They challenge our scientific understanding, pushing us to develop better monitoring methods. They expose the vulnerabilities in our global systems, as Eyjafjallajökull did with air travel. They inspire art, literature, and myth, becoming powerful symbols of both divine wrath and sublime beauty. They are a constant, humbling reminder that we are inhabitants of a dynamic planet, not its masters. Volcanoes do not just shape our world with lava and ash. They shape our civilizations by testing our resilience, challenging our ingenuity, and occasionally, by setting the stage for revolution. Our journey through Earth's most explosive history comes to a close, but the stories of these geological titans will forever echo through time. We have stood in the shadow of Vesuvius and witnessed a Roman city frozen in its final tragic moment, a haunting tableau of life interrupted. We have traveled to the Sunda Strait to hear the deafening roar of Krakatoa, a sound so powerful it circled the globe and painted the skies with fire for years. These are not just tales of destruction. They are profound narratives of transformation, demonstrating that the Earth's crust is not a static stage for human history, but an active and often violent participant in our collective story. The legacy of these eruptions is written in layers of ash and stone, a permanent record of the planet's awesome power. We have shivered through the year without a summer, a direct consequence of Mount Tambura's wrath, which plunged the northern hemisphere into a devastating famine and inadvertently inspired literary masterpieces from the gloom. We have explored the remote Alaskan wilderness, where Novarupta, the forgotten giant of the 20th century, roared in isolation, reshaping a vast landscape and creating the surreal Valley of 10,000 Smokes. Each volcano, whether ancient or modern, famous or obscure, offers a unique chapter in the grand saga of our planet. They show us that history is not solely driven by human ambition, war, or discovery, but is also profoundly shaped by the immense, uncontrollable forces that lie just beneath the surface of our world. The modern eruptions of Mount St. Helens and Eyjafjallajökull have brought these lessons into our own time. We watched in real time as a mountain fell sideways, unleashing a lateral blast that flattened forests and served as a violent reminder of nature's unpredictable fury. We saw how a relatively small Icelandic volcano could ground a continent, exposing the surprising fragility of our highly interconnected, technology-dependent civilization. These events prove that our relationship with volcanoes is not a relic of the past. They remain a potent and relevant force, capable of rewriting maps, disrupting global systems, and forcing humanity to confront its own vulnerabilities in the face of a power far greater than itself. From the fertile soils that cradled the first civilizations to the atmospheric veils that triggered famine and revolution, the influence of volcanoes is woven deeply into the fabric of our existence. They are the architects of islands and the sculptors of mountains, the bringers of both sudden death and slow, patient renewal. Their stories are a humbling chronicle of cause and effect on a planetary scale, reminding us that an event in one corner of the globe can have dramatic and unforeseen consequences thousands of miles away. These are the moments when the earth speaks, and its voice, etched in ash and fire, commands our absolute attention, demanding that we listen to its tales of power, peril, and persistence. The volcanoes we have explored are more than just geological case studies. They are powerful symbols of the Earth itself. They remind us, in the most dramatic fashion possible, that our planet is not a dead rock floating in space, but a living, breathing, and constantly evolving entity. The magma that churns within its core is the lifeblood of the planet, a source of immense energy that drives the creation of continents and the renewal of the land. The eruptions are the Earth's exhalations, moments when the planet asserts its dynamic nature. To live on this world is to live with these forces, to accept that the ground beneath our feet is not as solid and dependable as we might like to believe. It is a world of constant, powerful change. This realization should not fill us with fear, but rather with a profound sense of humility and respect. For all our technological achievements, for all our cities and satellites and systems, we remain inhabitants of a planet whose fundamental processes operate on a scale that dwarfs our own. Volcanoes are the ultimate expression of this reality. They are a check on human arrogance, a demonstration that we are not the masters of this world, but rather guests on a powerful and often unpredictable host. Acknowledging this relationship is the first step toward a wiser and more sustainable coexistence, one built not on a desire to conquer nature, but on a deep understanding of its rhythms and its power. As we continue to study these magnificent and terrifying phenomena, we improve our ability to anticipate their behavior and mitigate their risks. Science allows us to monitor the subtle tremors and swelling that signal a reawakening, giving us the chance to save lives and prepare for disruption. Yet, for every question we answer, new ones arise. The exact timing and nature of an eruption remains stubbornly unpredictable, a final secret that the Earth holds close. This uncertainty is part of their enduring mystery and their power over our imagination. They will continue to challenge our ingenuity and test our resilience for as long as humanity exists on this planet. Ultimately, the story of volcanoes is the story of our world. They have buried cities and darkened skies, but they have also nourished the land, birthed new islands, and sparked the very conditions necessary for life to thrive. They are a perpetual reminder of the delicate balance between creation and destruction, danger and opportunity. As we look to the future, we must carry the lessons of Pompeii, Tambora, and St. Helens with us. We must remember that the Earth is alive, and in its fiery heart, it holds the power to rewrite our maps, our climate, and our human destiny at any given moment. Our survival depends on our ability to listen, to learn, and to respect the explosive giants that have shaped our past and will undoubtedly shape our future. Do subscribe for more valuable facts on geography.